The committee will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to conduct oversight over the U.S. Agency for Global Media and two of its broadcasters, Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I want to thank the Chairman Mass, for calling this hearing, and of course the full committee chairman for being here. USAGM's network chain of audience numbers over 420 million weekly viewers. With this large audience, a proud legacy, a mission to share America's story and report news to close society, USAGM and its broadcasters shouldn't be controversial as part of government in any way, shape, or form. It should be a consensus cause that brings the country together and shares our voice with the world. To put it simply, under current management and leadership, we believe that may not be happening. USAGM's leadership has allowed the agency, particularly VOA, to drift into becoming another mainstream media news organization, indistinguishable from NPR and others. That is clearly not the mission we pay for. Let me be clear, merely modeling journalists' best practices is an insufficient justification for an agency that consumes $800 billion plus taxpayer dollars per year. Worse, as a recent report from Chairman McCall makes clear, USAGM's senior leadership has focused not on its critical challenges, but on protecting its favored staff. USAGM is the only organization where you can blatantly lie on your resume and get a pass as a Voice of America's Persian News Network did. We would like to know why, and that is part of the reason for the hearing today. Another issue I have personally engaged with Voice of America, it's in its Middle East coverage of the October 7th murders in Gaza. Specifically, its refusal to call Hamas terrorists what they are, Hamas terrorists. Here are the facts after October 7th's VOA reporters were instructed to do, and I'm quoting, avoid calling Hamas and its members terrorists, except in quotes. When my office and others brought this to light, VOA claimed it clarified its response, but it clearly didn't. We have the opportunity to faithfully and truthfully report brutal attacks by terrorists, and we squandered that opportunity to reach millions of people who may have been receptive to that message. Now, this happens before, now, Mr. Abramowitz, this happened before you took offer at VOA. And so I understand that your job is one of taking on responsibility for things you didn't cause, but you now have the job to change it. Which brings me to a larger point. VOA needs to re-engage with its charter, which says, and this one is in quotes, will respect America, not any signal segment of American society, unquote. And, quote, will present the policies of the United States clearly and effectively, and will also present responsible discussions and opinions on those policies. It is the policy of successive administrations and is the unanimous position across all acceptable corners of U.S. political spectrum that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they've been recognized so before their terrorist attack on October 7th. And its members are terrorists. VOA did not take that stance and violated its charter. It also has been reliably informed that a senior VOA editor took reporters to use attribution because opinion in Moscow, Tehran, and Beijing didn't see it that way. I don't spend $800 million of the taxpayers' money to represent Tehran, Moscow, or Beijing. In fact, these are all adversary states. Your job is to have the people of Russia, Tehran, Beijing, and other countries that repress free speech know what the truth is, not the other way around. You are the voice of America, not the voice of Russia, the voice of Iran, or the voice of China. When confronted with these failures, I have discussed with senior leadership at USA GM and VOA, you've doubled down and mocked congressional oversight. It's a classic leadership failure, one that can bring down entire agencies. Ms. Bennett, your written statement focuses a lot on successes. Undoubtedly, there have been many successes. I was a soldier in the Cold War, and the radio that went across the Czech border kept us out of a war in no small part and kept the hope alive in the Eastern Bloc. But we cannot address USA GM's failures without working to address its current shortcomings. At a time when American people are demanding to know what value they get from each agency, we must work together to make needed reforms and to root out waste, fraud, and clearly be accountable for the words you use pursuant to your mandate from Congress. And with that, I recognize the full committee chairman.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank Chairman Mast for his work on this issue, and also send my condolences to him. His father just passed away. So to Brian and his family, you're in our thoughts and prayers. The U.S. Agency for Global Media is a critical pillar of America's soft power. It is and will continue to be a beacon of freedom, supplying the truth to those living under tyranny and oppression. USAGM funds critical entities including the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Free Asia, as well as the Middle East Broadcasting Network. These are the radio stations and news outlets that fight propaganda, pushed by state-controlled media under the iron fist of dictators and despots like Putin, the Ayatollah, and Chairman Xi. They've shined a spotlight on the war crimes of Putin. They've even broadcast this committee's work. And like our report on the origins of COVID in China, they played a critical role in translating that report into Mandarin and sending it all across mainland China. But for all the good USAGM is capable of, there remain serious problems with how it's being managed. In early 2021, whistleblowers contacted Congress regarding the reinstatement of Ms. Satari Sieg, then director of Voice of America's Persian News Network. The whistleblowers reached out to congressional Democrats first, but they were ignored. And when they came to me, the ranking member of the committee at that time, I immediately opened an investigation into their claims of misconduct. The whistleblowers allege wide-ranging abuses, including that Ms. Sieg frequently berated staff, used taxpayer funds for personal travel, awarded government contracts to friends, falsified her education credentials, and engaged in a pattern of favoritism. Additionally, this committee worked very closely with the French embassy, which informed this committee back in 2021 that Ms. Sieg did not attend the prestigious Sorbonne as she had claimed, and she does not hold a PhD or an equivalent. Also, this was established 3 years ago. The USAGM still refuses to accept these facts, but the evidence was clear. The whistleblowers were right. And in light of this investigation, I have serious concerns about employee vetting at this agency. Since this episode represents a continuation of a troubling pattern. But I want to be clear, poor HR decision-making by senior officials does not overshadow the important work being done by their subordinates, nor does it cast doubt on the important mission of this agency. Look no further than Radio Free Europe. Radio Liberty is a shining example of how these outlets should function. I'd also like to commend Mr. Steve Capus, who is here today, on the work that you've been doing, sir. Journalists working for these outlets are incredibly brave. Some have served time in prison for simply telling the truth. Many of them have fled the oppression of their homeland to report on the tyranny of governments. They can't tell their family where they are or what they are doing for fear of reprisal. What the Sieg investigation has shown is that these journalists' courage is undermined by internal dysfunction at the agency. The U.S. Agency for Global Media must serve as the voice of what Ronald Reagan called the shining city on a hill. But for that mission to be realized, USAGM leadership needs to reestablish its credibility with the Congress. There's nothing more powerful than the truth. When people have the freedom to choose their own destiny, they will always choose freedom. The world is on fire, and now more than ever, they need that beacon of truth from the shining city on the hill. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Meeks, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so pleased to see each and every one of you here today. And I'm pleased to join this hearing so that we can receive an update about the important work that's being done by the U.S. Agency for Global Media and the two of the independent broadcasting networks it supports, the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. Thank you for all you are doing, for each and every one of you, and for being here today. It's so good to see you in the work that you're doing. Now, I must say that this is in stark contrast to the agency's former CEO, Michael Pack, who defied a lawful subpoena to appear before this committee for a hearing about his tenure in September 2020. And at that time, I was the chair, and Ranking Member McCall's concerns were articulated at that hearing about the problematic leadership of the agency under Mr. Pack, and I agreed with him. And that's why I'm so glad to see the new leadership, to see all of you here today, to discuss the work of these important agencies. We all know that the global information space is more active and more contested than it has ever been before. Around the world, we see anti-democratic regimes suppressing the free exchange of ideas and information, intimidate journalists into self-censoring, and control new media technologies and online spaces. And we see our adversaries increasingly working to shape the information space with mis- and disinformation that intentionally twists and obscures facts, including about the United States of America, our people, and our policies. And that is why your work remains critical to our national security. You and all of your colleagues are on the front lines. You are helping people around the world to push back against lies with the truth, to counter malign influence with open and democratic debate, to protect against the undermining of independent journalism, as well as promote the U.S. values and interests, our values. As the global information landscape evolves, your agencies have to meet this critical moment. By expanding your reach in emerging media landscapes in places like Africa and the Western Hemisphere, to counter harmful Chinese and Russian narratives that threaten to take root. By advocating for your journalists and stringers who have come under threat simply for their reporting, and in some cases have been jailed for it. And by modernizing your work to ensure that the U.S.-supported broadcasters are amplifying independent news in more languages across more platforms to nourish audiences' hunger for unbiased facts and information. When I travel, we can see that they're looking for unabashed and unbiased facts and information. So I look forward to hearing about such efforts today and about the resources and authorities you need from us in Congress to be successful. We know you can't be successful without Congress working with you. It is unfortunate, in my opinion, that I have to worry at times by my colleagues across the aisle will engage you in a narrow conversation today. The Republican majority has seemed set on obscuring the history of Mr. Pak's problematic tenure, including by reopening an investigation into a VOA employee that Pak lieutenants had once tried to remove. And they tried to do that until federal watchdogs paused the firing and later described as prosecuted due to animus. So let me be clear. If there are ongoing problems or management challenges at any of your agencies, it's your responsibility to deal with them. And I believe you're doing so. And we want to hear more about that. But your role in our oversight of your work should never be to simply peddle a partisan narrative or settle personal vendettas. If our Republican colleagues are serious about the investigations they have undertaken on USAGM and its broadcasters, then they should be transparent and let the facts speak for themselves, including by publicly releasing the transcripts from hours of closed-door interviews with USAGM and VOA officials from which they have repeatedly cherry-picked. So I close this by saying, let's get back to focus on real problems and real facts. The independent journalists you all support around the world risk their safety to report unbiased information, and they deserve no less than our concerted support. So let's get to the facts, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the chairman, ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Crow, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. The work you and your teams do, often in hostile and dangerous environments, is essential to supporting independent journalism, access to objective reporting, and amplifying American values abroad. That work is as important now as ever in this era of renewed great power competition against Russia and China, a competition that is put into sharp focus this week as our NATO allies gather in Washington to discuss the plan for the threats that we all collectively face. I'd like to start by laying out what I hope today's hearing will highlight today. The first is a point I've already alluded to, and that is the United States Agency for Global Media and the broadcasters and grantees it supports are critical to promoting freedom of the press and countering authoritarian disinformation. Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, as well as other U.S. AGM-supported broadcasters and grantees, provide objective reporting on global news stories and undertake independent journalism in places around the world where that information is hard or impossible to come by. And the fact that it's objective and independent is actually what makes it so strong and effective, and what contrasts it with the disinformation and misinformation coming from our adversaries. So I want to be very clear that it's not the role of this committee to tell you all what to report and how to report it, because that act alone would undermine the credibility, the veracity, and the effectiveness of that information. It would make it just like what our adversaries do. We report the facts. That is an American value, and that is what we're here to talk about. The second issue is the question of resources. I'd like you to help us understand just how important it is for us in Congress to invest in you and give you the tools you need. While malign actors like Russia, China, and Iran are cracking down on independent journalism and are flooding the airwaves with propaganda in their own countries and around the world, we must give you more tools and more resources to combat their malign activities, not fewer. And yet, just a few weeks ago, the majority passed our annual state and foreign operations budget bill that made deep cuts to U.S. AGM funding. I'd like to understand the risks as you see them of such a dangerous and ill-advised decision. So again, I look forward to discussing with our witnesses the important work that you all do and having a fact-based discussion. Actually, one other thing I want to point out is that in any large organization, there are always HR issues, and it is your job, as both the chairman and the ranking member alluded to, of making sure you run your organizations and you address HR problems. But it is also not the role of this committee to serve as an HR office. We will look at systematic issues, we'll look at systematic problems if there are any, but to take up individual cases based on prior grievance or to settle scores of the prior administration is not the role of this committee, and we will not tolerate it. So with that, I look forward to having a conversation with all of you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. It's now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished witnesses before us today on this important topic. First, the Honorable Amanda Bennett. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Welcome. Next, Mr. Michael Abramowitz, who is the Director of VOA, or Voice of America. And lastly, Mr. Steve Capus, the President of Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty. Thank you for being here today. As you know from watching C-SPAN, your full statements will be placed in the record, including not only your written statements, but any additional collateral information you'd like to bring to us. And with that, I would ask to try to limit to 5 minutes. I won't cut you off exactly at 5 minutes, but I will begin tapping the gavel if it goes beyond that so we can get to questioning. And with that, Ms. Bennett.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Chairman McCall for his statement and Ranking Member Meeks for his statement, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Crow, members of the subcommittee, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I'd first just like to reference the photograph that we have here, and we'll be referring to her quite a bit during our testimony, all three of us here, because she represents the dangers that are facing our journalists today. Her two teenage daughters, Alsu Krimasheva's daughters, have not seen their mother for months and months and months. She's been in a Russian jail since October, deprived of adequate medical attention and care, and wrongly accused of being a foreign agent. Earlier this year, she wrote, "My greatest wish is to get out of here alive and well. Some illnesses have gotten worse, but medications and regular exercise give me the strength to hold on and endure the pain." Journalism is not a crime. Yet around the world, journalists like Alsu are increasingly targeted for just doing their jobs. In Russia, Belarus, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Hong Kong, and China, our journalists and their families face enormous risks. Some of them are languishing in prison like Alsu, while others' families are threatened just for the association with objective journalism. And meanwhile, the People's Republic of China is spreading its own distorted message to Asia, to the global south. The US and other Western democracies and Russia is following suit. Disinformation by our adversaries, compounded with censorship of the truthful reporting, presents an urgent national security risk to the US. Many see this terrifying trend and conclude that democracy has already lost the information war. We don't think that. USAGM and our entities, the Voice of America here, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty here, the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, Radio Free Asia, the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, the Open Technology Fund, and the Frontline Media Fund were all built just for this moment. To power our mission, I have prioritized building a culture of trust and clarity among our workforce since day one. I've led with transparency, improved operational efficiency, and invested in the public servants who make our mission possible. And this approach has led some tangible results, including the fact that we've gotten our very highest ever rankings in the Federal Employee Group Art Survey, a survey in which we've been noted for being at the bottom of the barrel for years and years and years. For the first time, we are noted among the most improved. And it's only up from here. The federal board, the International Broadcast Advisory Board that joined us earlier this year, and its members are already expanding our capacity to advance our mission. And together, we've taken steps to protect the entity's editorial independence, to ensure their competitiveness, strengthen journalist safety, and secure top leaders across our agencies. And as a testimony to that, I'm proud to be here with two of our newest leaders, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty President and CEO Stephen Capus, and VOA Director Michael Abramowitz, who were chosen in harmonious cooperation among the board of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the IBAB board, and the CEO, and all of us agreed that these two gentlemen are really the extraordinary choices for this job. Many of our journalists have made tremendous sacrifices and faced enormous risks to report the truth, and they're some of the bravest people I have ever met, and we're doubling down on our efforts to keep them safe. Just to show you what that's like, I'd just like to show you this thing, which here, very hard to lift up even. This is a bulletproof vest. It was provided to us thanks to the reporters at Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and these were used by journalists reporting from war zones in Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, and other environments around the world. And while this protective gear is sturdy, it's only one of the tools we employ to protect our journalists. We've begun providing risk assessments, safety trainings, and recently we established a 24/7 threat working group that's available to our journalists at all times. In addition to journalist safety, we're investing in infrastructure and technology to secure our reach to regions where our reporting matters most. We recently launched the Frontline Media Fund to incubate and advance new approaches to distributing content, identify opportunities for savings, provide surge capacity during crises, and champion journalist safety and security. And as part of the FMF, we plan to launch the Global News Service this year, which will directly compete with an existing similar news service that has been operated by China for years. We are going to create one here in the USAGM. The Global News Service is a transmission and translation hub that will revolutionize how we curate and promote stories by our entities in Mandarin, English, and eventually in many other languages. We're also pursuing a new headquarters for our agency in VOA, and moving into a modern building will save us over $100 million in taxpayer dollars over the course of our anticipated 15-year lease, securing cost savings that can be reinvested in our mission, particularly in updating our technology to make sure that we are more competitive with the technology used by our adversaries to preserve and extend our reach for the future. You know, this hearing refers to management successes and failures, but with a mission this critical, failure is not an option. We're winning in the global information war. We're currently winning, but we're going to lose if we miss an opportunity to invest in our future, and we cannot succeed without your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abramowitz.
Thank you, Congressman Issa and Ranking Member Crow, and I want to thank Chair McCall and Ranking Member Meeks for your opening comments. And I really appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I was sworn in less than 3 weeks ago as the new VOA director after nearly 8 years as the president of Freedom House, where I had a firsthand appreciation of the impact and the global reach of authoritarian governments. When others asked me why I wanted to lead VOA, the answer was simple. I love the mission. It is a true privilege to take on this role during an age when propaganda is spreading globally and fact-based journalism is under dire threat. VOA is a critical bulwark against the accelerating efforts of authoritarian regimes to spread lies and disinformation. VOA is a vital source of trusted news and information in large parts of the world without access to reliable and independent news. It is a fierce defender of the free press and the safety of journalists who increasingly practice their craft amidst a dizzying array of physical threats. I could not be more proud to be leading VOA with its long and storied history of countering lies with truthful and factual journalism. I'd like to take a moment to express my appreciation to VOA's outstanding journalists and staff who perform their critical work in often dangerous and trying circumstances. Although I haven't been here for long, I'm already impressed with their work. On just my 4th day at VOA, I stayed during the evening to watch the news teams cover the Trump-Biden debate, and thanks to Voice of America's live simultaneous translation, speakers of Russian, Mandarin, Farsi, Urdu, Spanish, Ukrainian, Dari, and Pashto were able to follow the debate live and speakers of 40 other languages were able to access honest, fact-based coverage of the debate presented from Washington by a time-tested American media organization with a legal mandate to be accurate, objective, and comprehensive. I very much look forward to working closely with this committee and with the Congress more generally. I believe strongly that the nature of VOA's work and its importance to U.S. national security interests should inspire support across the political aisle. Voice of America is one of the most cost-effective foreign policy tools the United States possesses. We are a highly efficient antidote to the disinformation and propaganda spread by our adversaries. As the new VOA director, I promise to protect taxpayer dollars and use our funds effectively to advance our vital mission. And I'll expect myself and VOA personnel to adhere to highest journalistic and professional standards. I'm eager to sit down with this committee to get your best ideas for how we can strengthen VOA in its ability to carry out this vital mission. I also look forward to working with my colleagues at USAGM and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty to find ways to better collaborate and coordinate our efforts. With China and Russia doubling down on information warfare, it is essential that VOA and the other networks work closely together to create synergies and avoid duplication. It is early in my tenure, so it's probably a little bit too early to provide definitive plans, but my aspirations for VOA are straightforward. I want to ensure that the agency continues to be the leading international broadcaster, providing factual and impartial news and information to international audiences, especially those living under tyranny. VOA will rebut misinformation and disinformation, whatever the source, and in addition, we will tell America's story to the world. And as our charter mandates, we will represent all of America, not any single segment. And in so doing, we will counter malicious narratives spread by state-sponsored media, extremist groups, and other actors. We will also present our content in a way that is relevant to the diverse audiences we serve around the world. VOA, like many other news organizations, faces an urgent challenge of building audiences in places where young people have turned away from traditional news sources. We need to win them over with stories that are interesting and meet them where they are, on their cell phones and social media feeds and in the languages they speak. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and thank you for giving your time and energy to an agency that was vital in America's efforts to win the Second World War and the Cold War, and that remains just as vital today in meeting today's challenge of defeating authoritarianism. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Capus.
Thank you, Chairman Issa, Chairman McCall, Ranking Members Crow and Meeks, the distinguished members of this subcommittee, including Chairman Mast. Thank you for hosting this important hearing and inviting me to speak today. Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty is a media organization with a proud history and a very bright future. It reflects the values of the American people through congressional and taxpayer support, and through its independence and the desire for freedom for more people in the world. RFERL is unlike most any other news organization. Everywhere we work, we're in the thick of it. Our news organizations parachute in, while other news organizations parachute in to cover a story a day or two and then go back to their safe homes. Our people are already home. They're firmly in place in some of the most difficult, dangerous places imaginable. There, we operate with a dedicated commitment to serving people as surrogate broadcasters, reaching people in their local languages and dialects, offering a dramatic alternative to state broadcasters' well-funded propaganda machines. We offer something completely different. It's called the truth. And just yesterday, the truth is, all of us watched in horror as a children's hospital was bombed in Kyiv, Ukraine. Our extraordinary Ukraine service is comprised of nearly 200 people based in Kyiv, Lviv, and on the front lines. And so there were some of the first people to show up at the scene. They rushed from their bomb shelter studio in the parking garage in Kyiv, and what they found was horrific. The video they captured was instantly shared around the world and seen by millions. Even the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense shared our video on their sites, and the truth went viral, and it was funded by you. This is how we compete with the Russian version of this war. And yes, we do all of that kind of frontline reporting in Ukraine, but we also do investigative reporting. We document Russian atrocities, outright war crimes, and this is important, we also hold the Ukrainian government accountable. Before, during, and after the war, our Ukraine service covers the local, national, and global aspects of this war for Ukrainians in Ukrainian. I've spent my entire career in American network newsrooms. I'm the former president of NBC News, but nothing has been as important as the work that I'm doing right here, right now, as the president of RFERL. These days, I work side by side with journalists dealing with issues of life and death. For example, a young Iranian journalist on our staff, Parisa Sobati. She is winning awards for her podcasts that connect young women of her age inside Iran who are facing oppression and terrible abuse just for being a young woman inside Iran yearning for freedom. RFERL has unsurpassed street credibility and brand equity in this region. We might still have the word radio in our name, but these days RFERL is a powerful multimedia company that reaches 42 million people across 11 time zones every week. That success is good, but it is hard-earned, and our opponents are well-funded. Consider this: China, Russia, and Iran outspend us by many billions, and they're not constrained by the truth. In contrast, RFERL is funded at a modest $142 million a year. We are outgunned, but we will not stop. Without us, Iran, China, and Russia will be very happy to fill the void, and we can't let that happen. We are a thorn in the sides of these dangerous regimes, and so they pass new foreign agent laws. They label us extremists. They call us undesirable. If our work wasn't effective, they would simply ignore us, but they don't. We clearly are a threat to them, so they go to great lengths to silence us. And the same goes for our colleagues on democracy's front lines in places like Taiwan with our colleagues from Radio Free Asia. And with thanks to the Open Technology Fund's circumvention technology, we reach inside closed societies. As I said, when all else fails, they imprison our people. As we sit here today, 4 of our colleagues are imprisoned. Amanda mentioned one of them. Alsu has been held in Russia for nearly a year. Our colleague Vladislav is imprisoned for more than 3 years now in Crimea. Ihar and Andrei are locked away in Belarus. In fact, Ihar Losik has been held incommunicado in Belarus for 505 days now. He's been forced to divorce his wife, separate entirely from his beloved profession and his family. Simply put, his life has been destroyed because he worked for us. I'm going to conclude with the words of a famous Iranian women's rights activist who's been recently freed from prison, who wrote to us, "Say hello to all of the Radio Farda colleagues. Your inclusive coverage is rare and very much appreciated inside the female section of Evin Prison. We want to do more. Why? Because all that we hold near and dear and as inherent fundamental human rights is at risk. We are at an inflection point in the world. In the past, during the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall fell, during 9/11, and as Russian aggression surged, RFERL has been there to bring home the truth to the darkest corners. We can't abandon the people who view RFERL as lifelines. It's worthy of your continued support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now go into 5-minute sessions, alternating between the majority and minority, and we'll begin with Mr. Perry first for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bennett, I'm sure you're probably aware that the oversight of your operation has been something that of great bipartisan interest for this committee for some time, active for years now, and I can't say that we're openly thrilled about the cooperation from your predecessors, and we hope it's better under your tenure here. Issues include, as you know, decades-long security lapses, a partisan bias, improper hiring practices, and abuse of visa programs, which are very concerning to us. Very concerning. We've got a wide open border, known terrorists coming through, criminals, and our national security is at stake, and the abuse of visa programs and the lack of fidelity regarding security clearance is problematic to us. And so you'll have to forgive us if we remain skeptical about USAGM's competence and trustworthiness. Mr. Capus, your eloquent talk made us think about the voice of America and USAGM of days past, but not of days that we've seen recently. And we'd like to change that. Clearly put, and simply put, you're to serve the long-range interest of the United States of America and its citizens. During your tenure, ma'am, as director, according to various VOA reporters, you and other agency officials halted a live interview with a known Chinese dissident after Beijing allegedly complained to the State Department. And then VOA fired the journalist conducting the interview. Now, that's the side of the story I got. I'm sure you have something else, and I'm interested in hearing it. But what also concerns me is the VOA used CCP talking points to describe the PRC's COVID-19 response efforts, stating, and I quote, "From Asia to Europe, South America to Africa, China is providing or has pledged humanitarian assistance in the form of donations or medical expertise," unquote. Which might be the right thing to do if you also included the fact that it's very likely, and it's been known for some time and finally admitted, that the likely location of the release of the virus is the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That might be at least a counterbalance. But we're not here to do Beijing's bidding for sure, and certainly not use the taxpayers' money to do that. I'm wondering, and this is another subject, but along the same line, do you, ma'am, consider Hamas as a terrorist organization? Is Hamas a terrorist organization?
I'm a head of a federal agency.
I know, ma'am, you are. But
I will accept the definition that's given by the United States, which has designated Hamas as a terrorist organization.
okay, so Hamas is a terrorist organization, you agree, and therefore its members are terrorists, yet seen a memo, an internal VOA guidance after the October 7th attack by Hamas directed VOA staff to avoid calling Hamas and its member terrorists, except in quotes. Why would that be?
That was a personal opinion by someone that circulated around. It was not by any means the policy. The policy is to be careful about the use of the word terrorist with Hamas or any other group, but to use it as it is appropriate. And this is one situation where artificial intelligence really enabled us to shed light on an important situation in response to letters from both sides of Congress. We used artificial intelligence to look through all our languages and look at
that's great, ma'am. I appreciate that, but let's just drill down that on that a little bit. So Hamas is a terrorist organization by the definition of the United States government. You agree, therefore its members are terrorists, and you're saying you're using artificial intelligence to determine when it's appropriate. So tell me when it's not appropriate.
No, sir. You said we used artificial intelligence to determine all the instances in which we did use the word terrorist in describing Hamas. We used it frequently. We sent a graph of all the instances to the members who wrote the letters to us. We have used it frequently. We've used it in quotes. We've used it out of quotes. We've used it.
When does it go in quotes and when does it go out of quotes?
There's very widely used standards as to how it's used, and people, the journalists are using their own determination as to whether or not it's appropriate to use it in quotes or not quotes. But we use it in both ways.
But the journalists work for you, and you work for the United States citizens, and Hamas is a terrorist organization designated by the United States of America who attacked Israel, and the free world, or the world that wishes to be free, is counting on you to call the balls and strikes, not equivocate whether Hamas is a terrorist organization that slaughtered Jewish individuals without cause. And that is why many of us have pause about funding your organization, because if we can't count on you to have the correct judgment regarding such an egregious occurrence, well, the American taxpayers don't want to pay for that. I yield.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the ranking member for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Bennett, I want to pick up where we just left off here because there's just some facts and then there are things that are not facts. I'd like to give you a minute or two to actually explain the facts about how your organization has treated the reporting on Hamas and its designation as a terrorist organization.
Yes, thank you. And yes, we do not shy away from using the word terrorist in conjunction with to Hamas or any other terrorist designated organization. We have found that the examples of many, well over 1,000 examples in which we've used that exactly as you described in appropriate manners. There are best practices guides that talk about how careful you have to be in using the word terrorist because you don't want to apply it indiscriminately. And the thing that originally started this discussion was mistakenly described as a policy, when in fact it was an email sent around to staff by a person who was expressing her opinion, as I think we're all entitled to do. It did not represent the policy. The policy is, as I've stated, which is that we are careful with the use of the word terrorist, but we did not shy away from using it in conjunction with Hamas or any other terrorist group.
And just to clarify, you're careful with the use of that word because it's a serious word. You take it seriously. You're careful generally.
We're careful generally in using the word generally, and that applies to Hamas or any other terrorist organization.
And you've never shied away from using it with regard to Hamas as a matter of policy.
We have never, and we can provide examples of it to anyone who requests and have done in the past.
And to clarify, your use of AI wasn't actually to determine whether or not to use it, was actually to do the extra due diligence and to make sure across your entire enterprise that you were looking at all instances. So you actually were going kind of above and beyond by doing a scrub using AI. Is that accurate?
That's correct. For the very first time to do a scrub in all the languages that are used inside USAGM to look and make sure that we were using appropriately as everyone rightfully demands us to do.
Okay, thank you. I want to touch on the issue of budgeting and resources. I mean, you outlined in the beginning the incredible case as to the powerful tool, and Mr. Capus, you said it so eloquently when you indicated that the response from our adversaries actually indicates how effective you really are. I mean, they come at you and your journalists and reporters very hard because you pose a threat, and you pose a threat because you're good and you're credible and you're an important tool. So if we were going to cut your budgets, as the majority proposes to do, what would that look like in your organizations? What would be those hard decisions, those things you wouldn't be able to do for us? We can start anywhere we want to start.
Well,
I would say would have a devastating impact on the work that we're doing, and I mentioned some of that in my opening statement. The work right now is vital. We are, without a doubt, targeted by Russia, by Belarus, by Iran, by China, you name it. And if we leave the playing field, if you will, if we leave that space to those countries and their propaganda and attempts to sway public opinion, we're giving them that terrain to themselves. We're busy in all of these areas. The degree of threat that our people face cannot be understated. Right now, we have to devote significant resources to advocate for our people, legal resources to try to get them out from behind bars, and I don't want to leave anybody behind. That's the other thing that goes along with the mission of these organizations right now, is to take care of our people.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that, Mr. Abramowitz?
I would just say that on the issues that this committee cares about, that we care about, coverage of Iran or Russia, it would be quite devastating to have the kind of cuts that I've seen bandied about. What's interesting to me, just in the first few weeks of being at VOA, is that I see that when big news stories happen, like the debate I mentioned, but also 2 years ago during the Women's Lives Freedom protests in Iran, during the recent terrorist attacks inside Russia, that we have a large reach in those countries, and the people of those countries come to VOA because it's the only source of information to kind of counter the false information that is coming from the government. And so that's what the concern would be, that we would steadily lose that ability to push back against that false information.
Yep, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member. Ms. Bennett, Satara Siege was fired for lying on her resume, for mishandling taxpayer dollars, and harassing staff at the United States Agency for Global Media. Why was she rehired?
Sir,
Microphone.
Sir, that whole issue has been thoroughly overseen. I have great respect for the oversight capabilities and responsibilities of this organization. It's been thoroughly overseen over a period of 3.5 years, including all the issues you mentioned there. I hope that we are able to, as a conclusion was drawn, a report was issued. I'm hoping that we'll be able to work in partnership with your committee in oversight of the important things that are now facing us. So,
Well, ma'am, do you have any comment on that? I mean, I know there's a public statement that was issued following the Foreign Affairs Committee report. I mean, so you clearly have no problem with commenting on the matter. I'm just wondering, why was she rehired?
sir, it's really, as you know, inappropriate to talk about personnel issues in an open forum like this, although this whole entire issue has been very thoroughly vetted.
Well, ma'am, it's taxpayer money. I think it's very appropriate for us to talk about it. And I would ask you, I would issue some caution there. You know, the Privacy Act doesn't apply to Congress, and these are taxpayer monies. And these people, ma'am, you know, we had whistleblowers tell us that this lady was harassing staff. I mean, is that what's acceptable?
Sir, you're right. We have spent 3.5 years being exceptionally cooperative, really trying to answer every question.
You answered every question, but you rehired her.
Sir, we dealt with that issue. We talked about it. It's in the report.
Well, I appreciate the talk, ma'am, but rehiring her to me is really defeats a lot of the purpose of why we're here. I think it was pretty much proven that in the committee report, it was unequivocal, and has even proven by a third-party credentialing service what went down on that deal. So that's very disappointing. You know, y'all released a report detailing Ms. Siege's offenses for which she was fired. Do you agree the committee's findings are accurate?
Sir, we don't always agree on everything the committee finds, but we nonetheless have great respect for the committee and its oversight responsibility.
And I can appreciate the lawyers giving you that answer, ma'am, but the evidence in the report that relates to her lying on her resume was verified by a third-party credentialing service. I mean, how do we go out here and tell people that we're hiring and some people that we're letting go that, well, we'll make exceptions for certain people because of whatever reason, and when they lie or they harass employees or other things, or there may be some financial dealings that we're not sure of, that we keep these people on.
And sir, as I say, we were extremely cooperative in talking to you about every single thing that we've been asked to talk about, and the report reflects the committee's view of it.
Let me ask you this: Do you believe the whistleblowers who spoke about Ms. Siege? Do you think they told the truth, or do you think they lied? Just tell me, what do you think?
Sir, that's not for me to talk about whether a person lies or tells the truth, sir, but I would like to say that we don't agree with everything that the report says. Nonetheless, we respect the oversight capability.
Ma'am, she mishandled over $1 million in taxpayer money. Is that alone not a fireable offense?
Sir, those allegations, long before I came back to the agency, were, I think, deeply investigated and found to be without merit, which is why I believe that the investigation focused in on the educational credentials and not on these other allegations, because they were disproved very early on, long before I came here.
Well, third party, I believe, begs to differ on some of those issues. Who else receives this level of special treatment at USAGM? Is there other people that have followed on the same path that you know of?
I'm not sure what level of special treatment they're asking about.
Well, ma'am, if there's a misappropriation or mishandled $1 million in taxpayer money, that seems to be something I would think we'd be concerned about, and it's very concerning to me when I talk to people about the level of trust in government and their lack of trust when things like this occur, I think it's pretty evident why they do not trust in government, because we're not managing our money and we're throwing it around. And this needs to change, and I believe it will be changing very soon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman did seem to want to know if there was merit to her false allegation that she had a PhD from a French university. Can you answer that on the record, please?
Again, sir, we answered these questions many times, including with 7 transcribed interviews by all the people involved.
I'm just asking if you could answer on the record whether she has a PhD or not. That's not a private question. And I think that was part of the gentleman's inquiry.
I think I need to defer to the testimonies that have been given by our people under.
Then let the record show that she did not have it and that those were truthful, that she had lied about it. And we'll let it leave it that way unless we get something different from a witness. With that, we go to the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to talk about some of the languages that you include and some that you don't. I've worked a lot with the Appropriations Committee to highlight the importance of including the Mongolian language. There are 9 million Mongolians out there that are in Mongolia, in Russia, in the People's Republic of China, and we're just not reaching them. And yet Mongolia is a neighbor that we need in a kind of an unfriendly part of the world. They have an opportunity to do independent foreign policy. They are leaning towards the West and democracy. We need to get information they have, and they need to hear from us. I wonder, Ms. Bennett, can you talk about what steps you've taken to try to establish a Mongolian language service? There's a Mongolian caucus here in Congress that would be interested in hearing about that.
Congresswoman, I completely agree with you as to the importance of the Mongolian language, particularly as it relates to its neighbors in the People's Republic of China and the issues surrounding it. And yes, we have done a fair amount of study and research as to the feasibility of adding that language. But unfortunately, like so many of the other languages that we would also like to add to reach those people, the recent budget cuts have made this really impossible to do. We have put it on our list, we've looked for it, we're going to request that funding be made available for it, but unfortunately, it's just a victim of the current budget situation, for which I really feel deeply sorry.
Well, I do too. I know that the report for FY25 mentioned that this was something that we should be doing, and then to cut the resources to make it impossible just seems not in our own national security interest.
I would agree with you, Congresswoman.
What are some of the other languages that you're looking at, like Mongolian?
Well, there's a number of places that we'd like to think about broadcasting into that we talk about. Just off the top of my head, there would be perhaps in the Philippines, the languages that reach the Philippines, Brazil, India, these places that originally were thought to have very robust free press availability, which no longer do. There's many, many parts of the world nowadays that we would like to really consider adding a broadcast to, and I think that those places would welcome our presence.
Oh, I think so too. Well, see if we can't make that case to get that funding back. Yet another reason why the budget shouldn't be cut. So let me ask you this. In Eastern Europe, we're seeing more and more regimes becoming more repressive. You've got Lukashenko in Belarus, and you've got Hungary, Poland. Moldova seems to be next. As you look at, after Ukraine, the pieces that start to fall, Moldova certainly is, kind of in that pathway. We've got a limited presence there, but despite the fact that Moldova gets an awful lot of propaganda from Russia, could you talk, Mr. Capus, about some of the maybe bright spots in that region and how we could increase funding there to push back Russian narratives?
Well, we do have a presence in Moldova, and they're doing some fine work right now. All across that Eastern Europe, and you get into the Caucasus and other areas. I was just in Georgia 3 weeks ago visiting our staff, dedicated staff that we have in Tbilisi. This is a group of people who not only are Georgian, but this is also a group of people who we've had to relocate several times. They used to work for us in some cases in Russia, then we moved them to Kyiv, and now we've moved them to Tbilisi thinking that would be safe. And now, of course, this terrible, yet another one of these foreign agent laws has been passed in Georgia. And so they're facing an uncertain future as well. We can't afford to continue to open one office, close another one, open in a new place thinking it's going to be safe. We've got to, and to be clear, we don't just simply do that as soon as it gets a little difficult. Everywhere where we operate right now, things are difficult. We stay there as long as we can keep our people safe, because the audiences expect us to be there. But it's an important task.
There's a lot of overlap with where you are. You mentioned Georgia and then Kyiv and making those moves. With HDP, the House Democracy Partnership, we are trying to do some of the same things that you are doing, but working through legislative bodies in some of these countries that are in very difficult neighborhoods. I think it's a good partnership, and I'd like to see it strengthened, not weakened by budget cuts.
We'd love to welcome you to Prague sometime to talk about it.
Thank you. I yield back.
We'll now go to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Chairman.
Would the gentlelady yield for just 1 second? Just want to get this in the record. I'd ask unanimous consent that documents from Carol Gunsberg, dated October 20th and October 10th, be put in the record. And her title is the Associate Editor, News and Standards and Best Practices. Without objection, to be placed in the record. I apologize, and please go forward, ma'am.
Not at all. I thank you, Chairman Issa, and my sympathies to Representative Mast and his family. Thank you, Ranking Member Crow, for holding this hearing today, and I'm especially thankful to the three of you. It is an honor to be in your company, to be in conversation with you, with the extraordinary work, the body of work you all have done, but especially what you are doing now. Please send my regards to all those you work with. They are well led by you, and that might reveal that I'm a little puzzled by some of the focus of the questions today on personnel matters, because what you are doing is so incredibly important, and we need to be an appropriate partner with you, not overseeing HR. I'd like to talk first about combating disinformation. We've seen a startling rise in the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and plain flat-out lying, both domestically and across the globe. We've even heard instances in this very room, which I find so regrettable. I've made a point to call out disinformation when I hear it and try to correct the record, because after all, if we are not operating under facts and truth, we are not operating well. I firmly believe we must ensure that people have access to reliable, fact-based information. We must support credible, unbiased media organizations that work to provide that information globally. Ms. Bennett, you say in your written testimony, quote, disinformation by our adversaries paired with censorship of truthful reporting threatens the viability of fragile democracies and presents an urgent national security risk to the United States, end quote. Mr. Capus, you similarly state that reinforcing the democratic foundation of other nations contributes to the safety and security of the American people. And I know, Mr. Abramowitz, you have similar responsibilities. How do you all check? How do you use your organization appropriately to check and combat disinformation, particularly in those areas where we see vulnerable democracies at risk?
I'd like to cede to my colleagues, but first to say something as basic as the fact that without VOA, without Radio Free Europe, there are big parts of the world that would not even know that there had been a Russian invasion of Ukraine, because the Russians were saying there had been none. These are the only two sources of truth in that matter in very large portions of the world. So perhaps you two would like to talk about it. Thank you.
Sure. Well, we do it in a lot of different ways. I think one of the things that we have different, we have 48 different language services, and each of those services approaches it differently, but often there are, fact-checking or disinformation monitoring types of enterprises, that are carried out that are appropriate for each culture. So, for instance, the Mandarin desk, I've learned, we have a disinformation desk, and they were looking, for instance, at how Google's artificial intelligence gave answers online, and they discovered that often the answers were in line with Chinese propaganda. Then when the chatbot the Google chatbot was silent on issues like human rights abuses in Xinjiang or street protests against COVID. And so our team of reporters surfaced that, and that became something that got public, and many members of Congress and both parties learned about that, and they publicized it. So it's dozens of different exercises like that across the news services that we do that.
Thank you. Mr. Capus?
There's a number of things I'd like to say about this, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I would say that all of the services, and you have to remember that we're operating in 23 different countries, 27 different language services. All of our entities have the mandate of identifying disinformation campaigns. Often we're some of the first people to spot them before they go viral. And so they have the mandate to find them and then report on them. You can see examples across the board of all of our services doing incredibly important work in this. I think there's a misperception that our job is to simply be propagandists on the other side. Nothing could be further from the truth about that. We have a mandate to present the truth. If we are viewed as simply a mouthpiece for the United States government or for just being the flip side, being propagandists, then I can't think of a quicker way for all of us to be deemed irrelevant by the audiences that we're trying to reach. So we don't play games with the news. That's the most important thing that I would say that would be a takeaway, I would hope, is we don't play games with the news. We report what's going on, and that's the mission.
I thank you for that fine, diligent filter, and it's so desperately connected to national security for us, but also globally. So thank you, and especially thank you for the reporting at the Children's Hospital yesterday. Extraordinary.
Thank
I yield
you.
back.
I thank the gentlelady. I'll recognize myself now. Ms. Bennett, the committee has asked for and not received any substantiation, including dissertation, grades, documents from a university showing this alleged PhD. We have a valid whistleblower and substantiation from the French government that she does not have the degree from the Sorbonne that she says she has. Now, you've refused to answer. You're saying that you'll let the report speak for themselves. So on behalf of the full committee chairman, I'm just simply going to make sure that on the record, this committee believes that you have rehired somebody who lied about their degree, and they've been reinstituted as somebody over the control of others in a position of authority. Now, that's not an HR statement. That is, in fact, a management statement pursuant to this committee's oversight and pursuant to what we do when we have whistleblowers report false allegations. Until or unless you find a way to change that, on behalf of the chairman and on behalf of myself, we will still stand feeling that you have not righted the ship. If you can find an explanation showing why you believe she should be rehired because her claim was not false, or that you are perfectly happy to have somebody who has lied, but they're pretty good at other things, then say so to the committee. And until you do so, that's where the record is going to be, since you refused to answer. Now, as to Carol Gunsberg, her title, which I already put in the record, is the Associate Editor of News Standards and Best Practices. That's not somebody just sending something around. That's somebody with the authority to say how things should be done and to interpret what best practices are. Is that not true, ma'am?
At the time, she was the acting in that position, and she was interpreting on her own behalf?
Ma'am, she had the title. Acting gives her the title and the power. So my question to you is, wouldn't you have to agree that when someone sends something around and they have the title that says they, in fact, are the interpreter and the boss when it comes to news standards and best practices, that's not just, as you said, somebody sending something around. That's management making a statement telling people not to use Hamas terrorist, except in quotations. Wouldn't you agree to that?
Sir, she interpreted the best practices information, which is readily available to everyone.
We went through a great deal.
It was a loose interpretation. It was immediately reinterpreted by management, and we were
When did that reinterpretation occur? It did not occur on the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, or all the way through the 20th. When did it occur?
Sir, unfortunately, this was done at Voice of America before Mr. Abramowitz's tenure there, so it was not done under his direct supervision, so we'd have to go back and look, but I was made aware of the time that there was a reinterpretation and a re-encouragement that people look to the best practices guide, which is readily available to every employee of USAGM.
So, in the intervening 2 months, one of the things that happened is I met with the acting head of it, and through a whistleblower discovered they went back and mocked the meeting and our idea that we would question whether that was best practice. So once again, for the record, it was more than 2 months. We are here because we do provide authorization and ultimately appropriation of an amount that over the years has been many billions of dollars. I believe in your organization, and I believe that the hardworking men and women, many of whom aren't Americans, they're across the globe, and they're operating, trying to bring the truth to people. I would ask all of you, and I know I didn't ask all of you questions here today, I'd ask all of you to go back and ask the question. We don't want you to be propaganda. We do know that people take great risk. But we also know that the voice of America and its other namesakes are in fact supposed to be the voice of an American position of liberty, an American position that promotes the human side of freedom. And it's not completely without a bias. It, by definition, does have the American bias. It does have the bias of the free world. That's what we did. That's what we sent over the Berlin Wall and throughout the Iron Curtain for generations. And so I'd ask you to please take a good look, because the term best practices for gentlemen, including Mr. Capus, the definition that exists at CNN versus Fox, neither one of those definitions work. And the definition at the Washington Post and the definition at the New York Times, quite candidly, when we contrast them, they're not looking at the same book. So your definition has to be consistent with a mandate that comes from Congress and a tradition that I think everyone on both sides of the aisle here today can be supportive of. And I know I've been tough on you, and I'm doing this on behalf of the chairman of the subcommittee, but I'm also doing this because I believe in your organization. And I would hope that this hearing isn't just one of those things you slough off and say, oh, that was good, we got it done. But you actually ask the question of, couldn't we do better than saying we have best practices and say, you know what, we have uniquely the type of practices we're proud to come before Congress and show them what we do. And please continue using your AI to sort of figure out whether you have some level of consistency over so many languages. With that, I would ask if anyone needs a follow-up question.
Thank you, Chairman. The only, this is less as a question, just wanting to point out in response to the questioning about this, this employee and the employee's credentials. The minority has, on numerous occasions, requested from the majority the transcripts of the TIs that the majority took at their request during the conduct of the investigation that is underlying the report. The majority has not released the transcripts from those TIs. So in the interest of transparency, in the interest of bringing to light all of the facts of this case, let's just release those transcripts so we can all see for ourselves what it is we're dealing with. What do they have to hide? So we will again reiterate our request from the minority to the majority to release the transcripts of those TIs so we can have a more thorough and open conversation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and we are asking whether we can get you a direct answer to that. I will, from experience, comment just briefly. As you know, you had members of your side in those transcribed interviews, and for purposes of the committee, you are free to ask questions relevant to that and even to opine on what you believe you understood in those hearings. They are not closed from essentially your release. If they are transcribed interviews, they are free even for you to say a great deal. If they're depositions, then the actual release requires a committee vote. But I would only say from my own experience that please feel free to bring copies or to refresh your memory and ask questions from it in the future. And hopefully we will be able to release all or whatever is mutually agreeable between the majority and minority shortly. Ms. Titus, do you have any further comments in closing?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Capus if he could briefly give us an update on Ms. Kermasheva's situation. We've met with her family, and we know she's being held. She's one of your journalists. Could you tell us where she is, how she is, what's happening?
Well, thank you for asking. Number one, she's a beloved colleague of all of us. She's been a resident of Prague for 25 years. She is an American citizen. She made what we now know is a mistake, not reporting inside Russia, but she went home because her mother was quite ill. And she went back to visit her, and when she went to leave, they stopped her, and she's been there ever since. She's been in prison now for 8 months, and sometime this summer, she will face a formal hearing. All of this has been pretrial. She will face a formal hearing. The charges are baseless. They have been brought up against her, we believe, because she works for us. Her conditions in the prison cell have been terrible. She was forced to sleep a mere few feet away from a hole in the floor that doubled as a toilet. And recently they moved her into a different facility. We have had to take the Russians to court in order to get just basic level of health care for her. And she's had some concerns. We've had to push to get those conditions treated, and we've had to go to court in order to get that done. She's not been able to have communication with her family. The United States has tried to send consular visits to her cell. We have been pushing the United States Department of State to give her the wrongfully detained designation, which we believe would give her the full weight and support of the United States government as we push for her release. And to date, she's not been given that designation, though we believe she meets each and every one of the criteria necessary. Her detention has been a blow to the organization because all of our people know that there are inherent risks, but this goes to a whole other level. And we feel most profoundly for her 12-year-old and her 15-year-old, two daughters who are wonderful, and her loving husband, who also works for us. It's cliche to say that a workplace is family. This is family for us, and this hits awfully close to home.
Is there anything we can do to call on the State Department, see if we couldn't expedite that designation?
Chairman McCall and this committee have already held hearings about all of the Americans who were wrongfully detained, including Paul Whelan, including Evan Gershkovich, Russia is using this as a political tactic. grabbing Americans as they can and see what kind of a price they can get in exchange. It's a hateful tactic, and it happens to have caught up one of our colleagues in the process. Yes, we would like to see the designation because we think it would help also, especially as she's about to go into the formal hearing sometime this summer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perry, any final words?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up, Mr. Capus, why do you suspect there's a delay in her receiving the designation? I mean, we hear the stories, and of course they're heartbreaking and they're unacceptable, they're outrageous. Why would there be any delay whatsoever if you know?
I'm not sure I can answer that, sir. I believe that we've had a very high level engagement with the State Department, and they have said, and we believe, we take them at their word, that they're doing absolutely everything they can to get her out, even without the designation.
Do they think having the designation imperils her freedom?
I think you'd have to ask them that what their concern is. I think that I believe that they would like to see her released as well. And
Well, I sure hope so, but my goodness. I mean, when they say they're doing everything they can and we're waiting on a designation, and it's your studied opinion that the designation would aid in her release or at least her defense, I can't imagine what the rationale would be. And if you do get the answer anytime timely, I think certainly I'd like to have it. Let me just one more question, Ms. Bennett. You might not really be aware, but back in the summer of 2020, OPM published a report questioning long-running issues with the way USAGM used its delegated authority to conduct background investigations for eligibility for access to classified information. Now, the MOU lapsed in 2012, which is quite a long time from now, but USAGM simply just continued to conduct background investigations for literally several years after that. Is USAGM still conducting background investigations for potential USAGM employees under delegated authority?
We are on the verge of getting back our authorities. We have handled every single thing that's been asked of us. I think there's only one issue left open, and we expect to get our delegated authority back within, I think, the next 30 to 60 days.
Okay, and who's conducting the investigations currently?
OD&I.
OD&I is currently conducting them.
I believe that's
And would you commit to providing the documentation regarding your eligibility when you receive it so that we have that?
Yes, absolutely. And I'd just like to correct one piece of misinformation. There's a misunderstanding that our employees have access to classified information. These are not people these are journalists. They report news outside just like every other journalist. They have no access to classified information, and therefore their security clearance does not need to reflect that.
Well, I didn't make that assertion. However, in past investigations, it was pretty clear that there were employees of USAGM with security clearance. I'm not saying under your command, but there were employees that had received the clearance that should not have received the clearance, if nothing else, for the fact that USAGM was not qualified and was not authorized to conduct the investigation, yet the clearances were granted. And that's, again, this is a dangerous world. We've got a wide open border. We've got known terrorists coming into the United States of America, and we can't be too careful. And so it's important that not only that we're conducting the oversight, but that you're watching that and understand that we're aware of that issue, and we don't want that issue to be replicated ever again.
I feel proud of the work that the staff has done in clearing up the issues that have been raised, and that we're very close to receiving our authorities back again. I'm very pleased with that.
All right, thank you, Madam. Mr. Chair, you.
I thank the gentleman. That brings to a close this hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members who asked questions. Both those members and other members of the subcommittee will have some additional questions for the witnesses. Would each of you be able to answer questions you receive in writing in the next 5 days?
Yes.
Thank you. Please let the record reflect all answered in the affirmative. The chair now.
Can I just
go ahead, Mr.
confirm?
Crowe.
I just want, your question was, Chairman, that they agreed to answer questions in the next 5 days. Are Are you saying those are questions that the members will posit in the next 5 days? I just want to make sure we're not
Yes.
committing them to answer within
it's-
5 days.
In the closing, it'll say,
Okay,
you know,
all right.
members may have 5 days in which to.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that's what you were referring to. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
All right.
Pursuant to the committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the late limitations, and without objection, that brings us to a close. Thank you.